Starting in 1932, 600 African American men from Macon County, Alabama, were enlisted to partake in a scientific experiment on syphilis. The Tuskegee study of untreated syphilis in the Negro male was conducted by the United States Public Health Service and involved blood tests, X-ray, spinal taps, and autopsies of the subjects. The goal was to observe the natural history of untreated syphilis in black populations, but the subjects were unaware of this and were simply told that they were receiving treatment for bad blood. Actually, they received no treatment at all. Even after penicillin was discovered as safe and reliable cure for syphilis, the majority of men did not receive it. To really understand the heinous nature of the Tuskegee experiment, it requires some societal context, a lot of history, and a realization of just how many times government agencies were given a chance to stop this human experiment, but didn't. In 1865, the ratification of the 13th Amendment of the U.S. Constitution formally ended the enslavement of black Americans, but by early 20th century, the cultural and medical landscape of the U.S. was still built upon and inundated with racist concepts. Social Darwinism was rising, predated on the survival of the fittest, and scientific racism, a pseudo-scientific practice of using science to reinforce racial bases, was common. Many white people already thought themselves superior to blacks, and science and medicine was all too happy to reinforce this hierarchy. Before the ending of slavery, scientific racism was used to justify the African slave trade. Scientists argue that African men were uniquely fit for enslavement due to their physical strength and simple minds. They argue that slaves possessed primitive nervous system, so did not experience pain as white people did. Enslaved African Americans in the South were claimed to suffer from mental illness at rates lower than their free northern counterparts, thereby proving that enslavement was good for them. And slaves who ran away were said to be suffering from their own mental illness known as drapetomania. During and after the American Civil War, African Americans were argued to be different species from white Americans, and mixed-race children were presumed prone to many medical issues. Doctors of the time testified that the emancipation of slaves had caused the mental, moral, and physical deterioration of the black population. Observing that virtually free of disease as slaves, they were now overwhelmed by it. Many believed that the African Americans were doomed to extinction. An argument was made about their physiology being unsuited for the cold climate of America. Thus, they should be returned to Africa. Scientific and medical authorities of the late 19th and early 20th centuries pseudo-scientific ideas specifically about the sex drive and genitals of African Americans. It was widely believed that while the brains of African Americans were under-evolved, their genitals were overdeveloped. Black men were seen to have an intricate preservation for white women, and all African Americans were seen as inherently immoral with unsatiable sexual appetites. This all matters because it was with this understanding of race, sexuality, and health that researchers undertook the Tuskegee study. They believe, largely due to their fundamental flawed scientific understanding of race, that black people were extremely prone to sexual transmitted infection like syphilis. Low birth rates and high miscarriage rates were universally blamed on STIs. They also believe that all black people, regardless of their education, background, economic or personal situations, could not be convinced to get treatment for syphilis, thus could justify the Tuskegee study, calling it a study in nature rather than an experiment meant to simply observe the natural progression of syphilis within a community that wouldn't seek treatment. This very experiment set their study in Macon County due to estimate that 35% of its population was infected with syphilis. In 1932, the initial patients between the age of 25 and 60 were recruited under the guise of receiving free medical care for bad blood. A term encompasses anemia, syphilis, fatigue, and other conditions. Told that the treatment would last only 6 months, they received a physical examination, X-ray, spinal taps, and when they died, autopsies. Researchers faced a lack of participants due to fear that the physical examination were actually for the purpose of recruiting them to the military. To assuage their fears, doctors began examining women and children as well. Men diagnosed with syphilis, who were of the appropriate age, were recruited for the study, while others received proper treatment for their syphilis. At the time, these were commonly mercury-containing medicines. In 1933, researchers decided to continue to study long-term. They recruited 200-plus control patients who didn't have syphilis, simply switching them to the syphilis-positive group if at any time they develop it. They also began giving all patients ineffective medicines or capsules with too small dose of treatment or mercury to further their belief that they were being treated. As time progressed, however, patients began to stop attending the appointment. To greater incentivize them to remain a part of the study, this very group hired a nurse named Eunice Rivers to drive them to and fro the appointments, provide them with hot meals, and deliver their medicine services, especially valuable to subjects during the Great Depression. In an effort to ensure the autopsies of their test subjects, the researchers also began covering patients' funeral expenses. Multiple times throughout the experiment, researchers actively worked to ensure that their subject did not receive treatment for syphilis. In 1934, they provided doctors in Macon County with lists of their subjects and asked them not to treat them. In 1940, they did the same with the Alabama Health Department. In 1941, many of the men were drafted and had their syphilis uncovered by the entrance medical exam, so the researchers had the men removed from the army rather than let their syphilis be treated. It was in this moment that the Tuskegee study's true nature became clear. Rather than simply observing and documenting the natural progression of syphilis in the community as they had planned, the researchers intervened, first by telling the participants that they were being treated, a lie, and then again by preventing their participants from seeking treatment that could save their lives. Thus, the original basis for the study, that the people of Macon County would likely not seek treatment and thus could be observed as their syphilis progressed, became a self-fulfilling prophecy. The Henderson Act was passed in 1943, requiring tests and treatment for variable diseases to be publicly funded, and by 1947, penicillin had become the standard treatment for syphilis, prompting this very study to open several rapid treatment centers specifically to treat syphilis with penicillin. All the while, they were actively preventing 399 men from receiving the same treatments. By 1952, however, about 30% of the participants had received the penicillin. However, despite the researchers' best efforts, regardless, this very study argued that their participants wouldn't seek penicillin or stick to the prescribed treatment plan. They claimed that their participants, all black men, were too toxic to visit a doctor. In truth, these men were taught that they were already being treated, so why would they seek out further treatment? The researchers' tune changed again as time went on. In 1965, they argued that it was too late to give their subject penicillin, as their syphilis had progressed too far for the drugs to help. While a convenient justification for their continuation of the study, penicillin was recommended for all stages of syphilis, and could have stopped the disease progression in the participants. In 1947, the Newborn Code was written, and in 1964, the World Health Organization published their declaration, both aimed to protect humans from experimentation. But despite these, the Centers for Disease Control, which had taken over from this very study, is controlling the study at the point, actively decided to continue the study as late as 1969. It wasn't until a whistleblower, Peter, leaked information about the study to the New York Times, and the paper published it on the front page on November the 16th of 1972 that the Tuskegee study finally ended. By this time only, 74 of the test subjects were still alive. 128 patients had died of syphilis or its complications. 40 of their wives had been infected, and 19 of their children had acquired congenital syphilis. There was mass public outrage, and the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People launched a class action lawsuit against the USPHS. It settled the suit 2 years later for $10 million and agreed to pay the medical treatment of all surviving participants and infected family members, the last of whom died in 2009. Largely in response to the Tuskegee study, Congress passed the National Research Act in 1974, and the Office for Human Research Protections was established within the USPHS. Obtaining informed consent from all study participants became required for all research on humans, with this process overseen by Institutional Review Board within academia and hospitals. The Tuskegee study has had lasting effect on America. It estimated that the life expectancy of black men fell by up to 1.4 years when the study's details came to light. Many also blamed the study for impacting the willingness of black individuals to willingly participate in medical research today. We know all about evil Nazis who experimented on prisoners. We condemned a scientist in Marvel movie who carried out tests on prisoners of war. But we did do well to remember that America has also used its own people as lab rats. Yet, to this day, no one has been prosecuted for their role in dooming 399 men to syphilis. Thank you so much for watching this very video on Frank Speaks. Remember to like, subscribe and hit the notification bell, and also drop a comment on this very video as your way of supporting what we do on Frank Speaks. Thank you so much for watching.